and welcome to a panel about psychological horror versus gory horror, that epic battle of psychological and gory horror. I am Sadie Hartmann, Mother Horror, and I am the co-owner of the horror subscription company Nightworms. We specialize in sending out horror every single month to your door. And I also wrote a nonfiction book about horror books called 101 Horror Books to Read Before You're Murdered. And with me today are all of these amazing authors, and I thought that we would just introduce ourselves for you today. So we'll just start in the order I see them with Chris.
Oh, okay. Hi, I'm Chris Panatier. I write some short fiction and novels too. My next novel comes out. I just got a hard copy from the publisher, Angry Robot. I don't know if you could see that. It comes out in April. It's called The Redemption of Morgan Bright, about a woman who has herself committed under false pretenses to solve the mystery of her sister's death. And it's it's kind of like Midsummer taking place inside the last house on Needless Street, if that makes any sense.
Yes, and I want it. Zach, you're up.
Hey everyone, I am Zach Rosenberg. I am author of books and short stories. My one that is most well known is Hunger's as Old as His Land, which is a Jewish horror western. And my upcoming book, which should hopefully be out this year, is called The Unquiet Grave, which is a Jewish Gothic horror, which I am just kind of describing as Carmilla meets Gaslight meets Crimson Peak. So
yes,
thank you. And I'm also basically do a lot of short fiction, and you can find those in places like Deadlands and upcoming in Apex Magazine.
Awesome. I love all the Gothic. Delilah?
So I'm Delilah S. Dawson. I am the author of over here at Bloom and The Violence. And then for middle grade, I have Mine and Camp Scare. I also write short stories and I do comics. And then I have a series of kind of dark, weird Westerns under the name Lila Bowen. And my next book is called Guillotine. It is the follow-up to Bloom. Like, it's not related, but it's in the same kind of friendly world. But I'm saying it's Ready or Not meets The Menu.
Oh my God. I'm here for that. Ness?
Hi, my name is Ness Brown. I'm a astrophysics graduate student writing sci-fi, fantasy, and horror. My debut science fiction horror novella, The Scourge Between Stars, came out April last year. It's out from Tor Nightfire now. And I wish I could talk about what is coming out next, but I think the most that I can really say right now is that we are back again in space, but this time when fungus attacks.
Oh, space and fungus?
Space fungus.
I love it. That's great. And last but not least.
Hi, I'm Scott Leeds. I'm a writer. My debut novel came out last September called Schrader's Chord. And I'm working on the next novel now. And much like Ness, I can't say much about it because my editor just found out about the title of it. And so it'll be out probably 2025, I think. Yeah.
I love that. It's like exciting news here for everybody tuning in. You get like the first inside scoop on some of this stuff, which is great. I also just wanted to have a little housekeeping. There is a chat that you guys are all welcome to partake in, and you can ask questions for the panel, and we plan on getting to those. If there's something pressing, we'll get to it right away, but if it's just a general question for the panel, we'll address those towards the end of wrapping up. So you can just leave your questions there. And also there's mutes and stop cameras on the bottom in case you guys didn't know. And I thought we could start off with an icebreaker question. There's a real obvious question when we say psychological horror versus gory horror, but we will get to that. The icebreaker question is just for the general audience. I would love to know what you, like, quintessential books that you define as psychological and gory. So, you know, the separation there. I'll go last. but you guys go ahead and pick a book to represent each. Delilah, you get to go first.
I mean, my first answer is the cop out, which is the book that got me into horror was Pet Sematary, which I read when I was 10 against my mom's will, which is both the most psychological horror on earth and the goriest horror on earth. And like,
Yes.
all of my beds like go to the ground. You can't, nothing can get under the bed really. But yeah, actually to separate it, I would say like Gory, anything by Eric LaRocca.
Perfect. Yes. Agree. Have your pens and paper ready, people, because these are going to be like wrecks for days on this panel.
Yeah, so Head Full of Ghosts for Paul Tremblay probably, and then Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke from Eric.
Yeah, super, super gory. Yes. Chris, what about you?
So for psychological, anything by Catriona Ward, I The Last House on Needless Street, like blew the top of my head off. And then so did Sundial, and I have Looking Glass Sound right back there, so I have to read that. I've heard it's even more twisty and crazy. So I think if you just want your brain like kind of wrung out like a rag, just read anything that Catriona Ward writes. And then for gore, I'm going more recent as far as recent reads. I thought that The Devil Takes You Home by Gabino Iglesias was specifically and pointedly gory in certain spots, in certain ways that I had never seen before. There's a scene with something called El Milagrito, which is, if you ever read the book, that scene will just stick with you forever. And then, of course, honorable mention is anything by LaRocca. And then one last thing is one that outdid all of them, which I could not finish, which I was really enjoying, but I could not finish, and I thought I had a really, really high tolerance. I think I do have a high tolerance, was Brainworms by Alison Rumfitt. It is.
Those aren't good words together.
It is really, and I will probably get back to it because I was really enjoying it and I want to know what happens. But I went through a lot to get to as far as I got, and I had to take a break.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, Brainworms.
That book honestly makes Things Have Gotten Worse seem like an appetizer, like a nice appetizer.
That could be a good dare. So you have to read Eric's book and then follow it up with Brainworms. Ew. Yeah. Okay, Scott, hit us.
Well, as far as gore goes, I haven't read much gore that recently because I've gotten on a weird like John Irving kick. Don't ask me why. But I remember when Haunted by Chuck Palahniuk came out. I was living in Bellingham, Washington at the time, and I went and I got the book and I sat down and read Guts. And I think it took me 2 days to get through that short story because I was physically sweating. I was like a flop sweat. I didn't know that writing could do this. And, having grown up on Clive Barker and stuff, I was like, I got this licked. I'm good. And I was not good. And then for psychological horror, it's not a horror novel really at all. But for me, the scariest book I've ever written, I wish, read was Flowers for Algernon. That just book messes me up. I think it's terrifying just to see, someone given the gift of intelligence and then watch it slip away in first person. It's, I think nothing is scarier than that, personally.
Yeah, this makes a good point. Ness, what are your picks?
For my iconic psychological, I would go with Silence of the Lambs, which had a really big impact on me growing up when I read it, probably a little too young. And then for gore, this is maybe a bit of a cheat because it's not a book, but I want to shout out Berserk, the manga by Kentaro Miura, which is, I think there are also elements of psychological horror, but you really get a visual treat along with all of that as well.
Good recommendation. And Zachary, what are yours?
I would say maybe my quintessential psychological horror is The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, which I really love I really love how the Gothic really goes into and has such a great overlap with psychological, and I honestly think Shirley Jackson is one of the best ones on there. I could also shout out Rebecca and probably a lot of others. I mean, a lot of people here name some great ones. If I could, honestly, if I could pick one gory one, probably be Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy, which I absolutely consider. I'm a Weird West author too, so I kind of got to shout that one out. But that is like that is the violence is so brutal, but all of it has such a point and purpose, and McCarthy just writes it in such a he writes it in such a beautifully brutal fashion that I just it's honestly it's a book I can come back to where just about every page is brilliant, and it's only made more because of that violence.
Yeah, that is a really brutal book. I had to buddy read it with a friend. We like held hands over cyberspace. Like, can we do
Can't
this?
blame anyone.
I don't know. I picked for mine Come Closer by Sarah Gran, because I remember feeling a certain type of way afterwards where I felt like the main character, where I was like, am I demon possessed? I came away with it really messed up in my brain psychologically. So there were times where I wanted to put it aside. I was just kind of like, I don't understand what's happening. And then also, like, for gory, I would pick anything by Nick Cutter, but like specifically The Troop was disgusting. Like, I took it on a camp out and I was disgusted. Like, there's animal stuff going on that's really gross, like major triggers. There's animal stuff going, there's like parasitical things, there's like kids doing disgusting things. Like, it's just all around awful, but also great. I love it. So I think the obvious question, and when I advertised this panel on social media, it was immediately responded to in this way. But the obvious question here is, why not both? Like, why do we have to do psychological versus gory? And I just finished The Wretched Valley by a debut author named Jenny Kiefer. That was totally both. Like, it was mind fucking and also like gory as hell, like super, super gross. So I love those kinds of books. So what, this is like specifically for Delilah, but I think everyone needs a time to answer it if they want to. But Bloom struck me as being very psychological as well as gory. So you want to talk about writing that book and then what you love about both?
Sure. So Bloom came about because my daughter, who is 17, got really in love with the TV show Hannibal, as I had been in love with the TV show Hannibal. And she was complaining to me about, like, why are all of the hot serial killers dudes? And I was like, well, because reality, if there are hot girl ones, we haven't caught them yet. But
because they're smart.
My answer was like, oh, let me write that for you. And so it definitely draws on the parts of Hannibal that were both beautiful and gross, and the concept of, some things that we think of are gross can be beautiful if seen through a different light. But that concept doesn't really work unless you have someone who is on the edge of knowing it. That character that is falling for, because it's a romance as well, that when you are really falling for someone, you miss a lot of red flags. And so the audience has the psychological layer of, oh God, don't open that door, dude. That makes kind of the gore at the end fun. So I feel like it's fun to have the psychological hold you and hold you and hold you, and then at the end you kind of see the gore that was there all the time behind the door.
Oh, I love that. That gave me goosebumps. Does anyone else want to tackle that specific question? Like, do we need to separate gore and psychological, or can we and pit them against each other, or can we do both?
I don't think you do. I think that they kind of go hand in hand, because I think gore by itself is simply just the gore. It's sort of a visual kind of thing, and that's its nature. It's a visual thing. If it's the gore because, or why the gore happened, I'm thinking right now of at the beginning of Jaws, the book in this case where Chrissy is in the water and she feels something bump up against her, and then she goes down and she feels that her foot's gone. And while that's gory, but we don't really see it. But it's that sudden, it's we put ourselves in the minds of where, like, who the gore is happening to. And like, ever since I was a little kid, the thing that has scared me the most is some sort of transformation. I remember seeing the back of the Nightmare on Elm Street 2 VHS box, hadn't seen the movie, but Jesse was like obviously turning into Freddy, and that scared me more than anything that the movie could actually do. And so when or like a movie like Society, where it's like, oh, like you're being changed or rearranged, and you don't know if you're gonna be able to be changed back. And I think that's, you know, we can't help but be psychological when we look at the gore, because we go, well, how are they going to be who they were before the gore happened? In many cases it's death, many cases it's not. And then you look at the side of like who is committing the gore, and more often than not, someone is doing it without blinking an eye. You know, when Annie Wilkes saws off Paul's foot and then cauterizes it with a blowtorch, you just go, I couldn't, like, the fact that she barely blinks an eye, and, you know, she just, you know, and it's even more than that. It's a more like, this hurts me more than it hurts you, where, you know, then you get sort of like, you remember your mom saying that or your dad saying that, and adds a whole different sort of psychological level. Man, I don't know if you can separate the two.
I mean, Superman 3. I don't know if anybody remembers Superman 3.
Are you talking about the computer?
I'm talking about the computer.
That thing fucked me up more than any other movie.
100%. I am still fucked up from that. I saw that. I was like, I don't know, 8 years old. My parents are with me. And I was like, I literally turned to my mom and I go, get me out of here. and they wouldn't, because they wanted to see what was happening. But watching Superman get turned into like a computer robot thing was to this day, maybe the scariest thing I've ever seen. And I've seen Lake Mungo. Yeah. And that to me was absolutely the scariest. I did want to also give a shout out, as far as books go, to Laurel Hightower for Crossroads, because Crossroads is, you know, gore, more is not always better. And Crossroads is about a mother who is making little offerings of herself at a crossroads where her son died to try to bring him back. And the way she describes these tiny little acts of violence she commits against her own body are some of the most like teeth curling, whatever expression you want to use, like prose I've read, that I would call absolute gore, but it's very minimalistic, and it's just the way it's done. It just sings. And I had nights where I was like, I'm not reading that tonight. Mm-hmm. And it's just a novella, you know, it's not a long read. So I definitely want to shout out to that, because she did both so well.
Laurel's amazing. You know, honestly, going on what we were saying, I really, you know, is it possible to have one without the other? Absolutely. Do they kind of play together in a way that make them both better, in that sense? I think one of the best examples, honestly, is Hellraiser, the Hellbound Heart. Does it the same thing, honestly, where Clive Barker is so adept at using the psychological horror aspect of it, where there's the lead up and he gets into the characters' heads and he makes you anticipate everything going on, that there's very little, when the gore actually hits, you really feel it. It is like you can actually see the hooks going in and the gore effects, and you feel it so much more because of what your care of the characters is. And I think psychological excels in a way of making you get into the characters' heads and care more about them, that when the gore actually arrives and when the gory horror hits, it's horrifying in the sense that it is happening to someone you do not want it to happen to. Like, I think one that always gets me is Audition. Where you have this entire movie of this buildup of pure psychological horror that draws you further into this web of dread and madness, and then at the end of it, you get one of the most infamous gore sequences in horror history, and it's so horrifying, not only because of what is happening, because it's happening to a character you don't want it to happen to.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting that we're talking so much about movies too, like in the psychological and the gore, because I do feel like the film industry has maybe put expectations on horror for what readers should expect. You know, so often I'll read a review where people are saying, well, that wasn't really scary because why? It wasn't gory, you know, or it wasn't, you know, it didn't deliver on this expectation, which when, you know, viewers go to movies, they have a soundtrack and they have, you know, dreadful music to help lead them into the horror, and they have the visuals and the special effects. Do you think that gore and psychological are like, which one do you think is more effective in story form, or do you think that both of them are as equally as effective because we don't have those visuals?
I think psychological is easier, to be honest. I think it's, for me anyway, it's harder to, I have to really kind of work with and like turn a bunch of dials if I'm trying to get gore just right, if I'm trying to get it to hit just right. I mean, like Scott said, from the scene in Jaws, that's really well done. She looks down and her foot is gone. You don't, it's not on the page, the foot being torn off so much. And so sometimes I have to write out the whole scene. This happens, then this happens, then this happens, and then just start knocking stuff out until it's just right. Whereas psychological, I mean, it's in our head, it's going on the page. To me, it comes a little bit more naturally.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot too, it's what builds up to the gore, what the reason for the gore is. Because if you open a book and the first sentence is they found the rat in the microwave. Yeah, that's gory and there was blood exploded everywhere, but you don't know why. And so it's like, all right, that's gross. It's the same reason, like, well, you know, a jump scare, it can be startling. Doesn't mean it's scary unless there's a reason for the jump scare and you're scared for the character. Then it's both. So I think both can be equally hard. Because, you know, again, just finding the reason for what it is. And then sometimes there is no reason, but you have to, you know, build up why there's no reason. And that can be hard too.
There's also a visual aspect to the gore where when you're watching the movie and you're doing this,
Yeah.
can't do that while you're reading the book.
Yeah.
But it's seeing it has such an impact that we can't quite get into the books, where sometimes I'll write a scene and I'll be like, that just sounds stupid. Like if that was a movie, you would not be able to look at it.
Yeah, there was actually a Stephen Graham Jones. Well, first of all, Stephen Graham Jones's trilogy, the Indian like trilogy, is all slashery. Like there's so many ways that he can describe violence that you just didn't know about, blood arcs and spattering and yeah. But he wrote a short story that I recently read called Solve for X, where I did put my hand, I was like, no, I was like trying to look through my eyes. Like it just was psychological buildup. It was like a torturing kind of situation. And the gore was so fucking precise that I couldn't believe that what he was able to accomplish on the page, like translating an image and a setting into my mind. And it was super messed up. Everybody read it.
Have you read Father, Son, Holy Rabbit?
Yes. Oh my God.
Yes.
That's like the gores. Of course, it's kind of minimal, but it's very, very graphic when you see it. In the psychological aspect of that story is just crushing, right?
Yes. Memorable because of what happens.
Yeah.
Yes. Entirely.
There's
true.
really just so many ways I've really grown to admire the ways that authors can use some very flowery and very interesting descriptions for gore, and also some of the ways that they like really, some very, like I said, very brutal ways. I was very fond of one book, The Light at the End, by John Skipp and Craig Spector, which is quite a bloody book, but not without being too much. But it really does that whole build up and anticipation, and the gore is used in a really effective way. Like it's interesting when you're like looking at like the old splatterpunk versus like, you know, the extreme horror of today, and some of that is like way too hard for me. I can't really get into it.
Yeah.
Because
does anyone have a preference of writing psychological or gore? Like, is one or the other just more appealing and fun for you, or do you kind of like them both for different reasons? Ness, I'm gonna call on you.
I would say right now in my writing journey, I'm a bit more partial to gore, especially in the realm that I'm writing it in, which is typically outer space. There are some truly wild and fun things that can happen to a body in space that I think are just so enjoyable to write about and to explore. I actually think that really building, really crafting a psychologically horrifying atmosphere in a book. I think it really takes talent. I think it takes like a good amount of craft, and it's a skill that I'm still working on right now. I'm happily tapping away at, I guess, the physical side of things, but I also wanted to. We were kind of talking about like, how do you bring this to life on a page? I also wanted to shout out some authors that I've read that have made great use of the actual page to kind of support what they're doing. So it could be the way that they use punctuation to kind of, I guess, indicate pacing, if they leave pages blank, or if they stretch things out over several lines, they don't use paragraph format. And I also, I don't, sorry, this is my co-author. I don't have it on me now, but I was really alerted to kind of the way that you can maximize your page to get kind of the biggest effect when I got back the advanced copies of my novella, and I saw that the interior designer on a sentence where I think I said, and the door opens to pitch black, the entire bottom half of the page had been blacked out. And then the words were left in kind of, blank font. And I wouldn't, I hadn't thought of it myself, but when I saw it on the page, I was like, that is so smart. It's so intelligent. So one thing that I would like to do as I get better at the craft of writing psychological and gory horror is I'd really like to play around with how they both physically look on the page.
I love that. I love when authors do creative things like that in books. It's extremely memorable. I love it. Anyone
House
else?
of Leaves.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a book where I'm not done with it. I've been reading it for years, only in public, only in the sunlight, because I love it, but it's you got to kind of toil through it. But that one is, I mean, he did everything that you could possibly do, I think, with formatting and with using the actual text to create horror. I mean, and it's levels and levels and levels.
And Chris, sorry.
I'm so sorry, Sadie. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, you just recently you're releasing a Gothic. So, I mean, did you dive into some psychological aspects there, or did you enjoy that?
Yeah, no. Well, I did a lot of research because it's sort of a contemporary Gothic, because I was sort of motivated by some recent events to write a story about how women are treated. And so I studied the 1950s a lot, and I read some books about mental institutions in the 1950s, and then sort of melded that with a very almost like hearkening back to sort of a Victorian feel in the actual language for part of the book. It goes a lot of places, but what I was trying to do was explore it's DID. It's what Catcher in a War did. It's not multiple personality anymore, but I'm trying to remember it's DIID, identity. Anyway, I don't remember the right name for it, but I was trying to create a situation where someone took on their own personality. And it's so I was basically, they create a false personality to find their way into this institution, and then that personality starts to take over. And so it's like multiple personality. Yes, dissociative identity disorder. Thank you, Anna. Thank you. I mean, it's in the book. I literally use the term in the book. This happens to me after I write a book. I start to flush it all out, right? So she starts to assume the personality that she had already created. And it is how those two personalities war with each other. So it's sort of a mixture of DID and things we're already familiar with, but then something new. And it took me several drafts to figure out how to line it up right between these two characters. They're two distinct characters, and then how they ultimately sort of cross over in sort of a Venn diagram of a person. So I'm trying to do a lot, and it's kind of, I always try to do something audacious and we'll see if it worked. I don't know. It hasn't gone on sale yet. That's in April.
It is on my Kindle though, so.
Awesome. You'll tell me, I'm sure.
I will. This question that I have here is for Ness. The Scourge Between Stars is both claustrophobic and intense for your readers. Is it easier for you to write scenes that prey on psychological fears, like, or do you feel like it's easier to go for the gross out? Like, when you think of your audience, do you see them taking on that psychological journey with you, or do you just want to like hit them with some really sick stuff to bring them in and then bring in that psychological factor?
I think for me, at least with The Scourge Between Stars, some of the psychological heavy lifting is already done by just space. Space is scary enough on its own. And so I kind of focused my efforts on the gory aspect, trying to help it both gross out and also serve the narrative in some way, and hopefully ultimately end up supporting the character arc and the development of character dynamics that I have going on in the novella. I think, I grew up, some of my favorite movies growing up were things like Pitch Black and Doom, and of course Alien, of course The Thing, and of course Event Horizon. And so I've always liked a really healthy dose of kind of gross with my horror, but specifically in a sci-fi setting, I think it melds and complements really well the inherent kind of constant psychological pressure of, that comes with being in space, that comes with any mode of space travel.
I think it's true what you say, like space is already scary enough. Like I know my business partner, Ashley, like almost refuses to read anything that takes place in space because she is already like terrified of just the idea of black endlessness and stars and just being out in the middle of nowhere like that is, I mean, I have the same feeling about being in the deep ocean. It's the same feeling. It's just endlessness. Yeah.
Totally agree. I actually, just very briefly before we move on. So of course, last year there was the very tragic business with the submarine and the Titanic. And I've always maintained that the ocean is way scarier than space. So I did the math on it. If you were to build a spacecraft, all you have to account for is a difference of 1 atmosphere between the inside of the craft and outside. And we're pretty comfortable with doing that at this point. But if you were to go just to the location where the Titanic rests, not even the deepest location in the ocean, you have to account for a difference of 400 atmospheres. So I would go to space any day.
I have never thought about it that way. How creepy.
It's terrifying, actually.
It is terrifying, isn't it? Like just the visual of that too, like the layers of depth. Oh, it's terrible.
Yeah, but has anybody ever seen a Carnival cruise line boat? Okay, that's way scarier than going down to the Titanic.
A family Disney trip.
Honestly, what gets me is like the idea of going caving or spelunking. Like the sheer claustrophobia of that, like something like The Descent. But even like if you read, I'm not going to say it right now, but even some of the real life incidents of people being trapped underground or getting caught in there, that just,
I know.
I am never doing that because I just can't even read about it.
I know, it's so terrible.
The Luminous Dead is actually a really good,
yes.
good one for that. And the thing about The Luminous Dead is that, I looked at the cover, I saw the title, Luminous Dead. I'm like, there's going to be dead people down here. And there are dead people down there, but not in the way that I thought there was. That I was freaked out during the whole book, freaked out because she's seeing things or she thinks she's seeing things. And it actually goes pretty easy on the whether there's any supernatural or anything like that. But the whole book, your like heart rate is up. Mm-hmm. It's just this extremely skillful job of keeping you in that cave And of course, most of it's flooded, so it's even worse, right? It's water and caves.
It's yeah, that was really physical, a physical read, like Whale Fall.
Yeah.
Ooh, oh my God, Well.
Right. Okay, Scott, is there a gory scene in a book that stands out in your memory as being particularly horrific? And I would like all of us to think about this question. Like, what do you remember in a book specifically that you will never forget?
I don't know. I think it was gory, but I guess it's a sliding scale. But I remember reading it for the first time, and I was probably 12 or 13, and I was doing fine. I was kind of blown to the book. I loved it. It was scary. I fell in love with the Losers Club. I felt like they were my own friends. I don't think there's yet been a better book on childhood since that book, and childhood friendship, on friendship in general. It was the Patrick Hockstetter scene where you kind of find out about his past and what he's done to animals. I've always been a crazy like animal activist. And when it's the scene with the puppy and the refrigerator, I won't get too into it just because I can't.
Yeah.
Same way that I still weep huge tears when I watch Artax sink in the swamps of sadness in Neverending Story. I can't handle it. I just can't do it. My dog is right back there. And I just, when I think of that scene with Patrick Hockstetter, it was one of the most justified deaths that Pennywise had in the book, I think. But yeah, I had to set that book down. I had to walk away a couple times. Like, I don't know if I can make it through this. And that to this day has always kind of stuck in my mind. And again, it's not necessarily gory as far as like blood and guts and spatter and all that kind of stuff. But when he goes back and he keeps checking and he sees the you know, the points at which the decay is happening, I felt like I just watched a snuff film and I had to take a shower. I just felt unclean. And I think that's what gore, when it's done right, and again, it's up to everybody here to decide whether that's gory or not, but it sticks with you in a way that I think psychological horror is different. I think it kind of creeps into you in a different way. I think, you know, psychological it can be sort of like, it's like a time bomb. You can read it and you go, oh, that's creepy. And then later on, when you're when you're alone at night and you have like the dark thoughts start to kind of creep in, it can blow up on you. Whereas like a scene like that, or a really particularly gory scene that hits you, it hits you sort of immediately. And then it just sort of stays and bubbles like all day long until, you know, I can play some Super Mario Brothers or something and just erase it. Yeah, that one still, I just, you know, I love Stephen King. I think we all do. But that one, I was just like, fuck you, man. Like, that's not.
Yeah. I mean, horror is never kind to animals in general. So it's.
Well, and I did it in Schrader's Court too. Like, I adore horses. I live up in Eastern Washington. There's tons of horses out here. There's horses literally right there. And I wrote this scene with these horses that's pretty bad and pretty visceral, and I remember a few people have come up to me and said like, why? And I was like, I think it's scary too. That's why I wrote it. It's like, you know, like we're together on this. We're in cahoots. You know, like I'm not sitting here like, you know, writing this and going like, deal with that. You know, I'm not the guy standing in the blizzard in shorts being like, you call this cold? Like, I think that's terrifying too. So we're, you know, this is a communal relationship.
Yes. Delilah, you wrote a whole ass book called The Violence. So I want to hear from you, what is a particularly memorable, violent, gory scene that sticks in your mind?
I mean, Gage getting his ankle sliced is the one that lives rent free in my, like, I think when you read these things very early on, they make an impression. Also, I can't remember which one of the Thomas Harris books it was, but when he cuts the guy's open in his brain and he's eating his brain while the guy's still alive. Yeah. And I think what gets me is the deliberateness of it. You know, it's one thing if somebody just hacks the top off like you're chopping off the top of a coconut. But it's another thing when you're like, this is very slow. Watch the very different, like all the different layers. We're going to peel this back. Like, oh, but you know, it's also like when I had to have an emergency C-section. And I remember laying there and my husband was like, your intestines are on the table. It looks like a Romero film. I was like, that's awesome. Take a picture. Oh my God. Where it's so weird that you're just like, I can't comprehend this anymore.
Yeah.
But in movies and in books, you know, we have to stop and watch it for this extended amount of time. So like the slow gore really gets me. And then in Chuck Wendig's Black River Orchard, just the way he describes eating those apples, where the next time you eat an apple, you're looking at it like, you better not mess with me. Oh, I still think about it. Like, I'll get a mealy apple and I'll be like, it's going to get bad.
I love that. It can really mess with us like that, right? I mean, I remember like Hereditary is like such like a psychological movie, but also like the flossing scene. I couldn't stop thinking about it. It wouldn't leave my brain. I would see it every time I closed my eyes. It just lingered.
And to be clear, most of the violence is very fast, brutal violence.
Yeah.
There's no slow violence in this book. It's all brutal.
I love that we're making a distinction between slow and brutal. Yeah, it's important. Zach, what do you think? What's a memorable scene?
Okay, honestly, there's two quick ones that come to mind. One, Jack Ketchum's The Off Season
Oh God,
comes
yes.
immediately to mind. There is one scene that is so Ketchum had a real way with describing gore that I do not blame anyone for being unable to sit through. Girl Next Door was a book I had a very hard time getting through. Off Season, there is a bit where someone is essentially sawed by cannibals and Ketchum gives you everything.
Mm-hmm.
But there's one that stuck out to me from the last few years, honestly. It is from a book, Sadie, I know you know this one, Christopher Buehlman's Between Two Fires.
Mm-hmm.
There is such an amazing bit where this one character, like it's a medieval horror novel where this one preacher hermit is revealed to be a demon, and he gives this great description of someone just says the name of God and the demon just rips his tongue out, and it is just so well described in such a quick and to the point way that it actually just really got under my skin.
Yeah, because you could visualize it. Like that's
Totally.
And that's the thing with Ketchum too. Like in Off Season, he puts you inside the mind of the victim, which I think is so effective. Where you're just like, is this happening to me right now? Is this going to happen to me? And it's just like, if you were really in a situation where some violence was going to be enacted upon you, like you would be having these thoughts too. Like, is someone going to rescue me? Is this really going to happen? Like, am I going to get out of this? Am I going to feel this pain? And he brings you inside, and it's just like, it's the worst because you're in the moment.
Ketchum is the guy, like, you know, you want to look away. So, like, you know, you feel like it's going to cut away any second because of that anticipation and because he gets so in your head and makes you feel that. But there's no cutting away, and it's just all the tougher for it.
Yeah, I know. Oh, God. Yeah. Anyone else have a memorable scene? Chris, I know you probably do.
Well, Superman 3. Okay. But I'm just going to throw that out there again. But I keep thinking, it totally sticks with me. I keep thinking about El Milagrito from The Devil Takes You Home. And the reason is because it is this intertwining of psychological and gore at the same time. El Milagrito is a mentally disabled, grown child chained to a bed. And I think it's a boy. His mother or grandmother is selling pieces of his body to people as good luck charms when they go on like these drug runs and stuff. And there's just a guy in the room who has like an Uzi so no one can come and steal the little miracle. And people come in and pay her money and she will lop off a part of her son's body.
Yeah.
And it just, when I read that, that's one of those moments where I'm in my room and I just went, burp. And I just sort of laid it down and just sat there for a minute. And I was like, okay, Superman 3 and this scene, those are really going to get me. And then one for pure just stands out, like so super gross. Clay McLeod Chapman does gross really well. And there's a scene in Ghost Eaters where, and it's unclear whether it's actually happening or whether it's just in the head. So again, it's a really good intertwining of those things where Erin, the main character, goes into a bathroom stall at her place of work, and her like mouth opens up really big and she like vomits out like this ectoplasm covered mushroom stalk. And it is the grossest thing. It's so absolutely hideous. But that one has stuck with me for a long time. So there's a couple.
Yeah, I totally equate those as like, you know, the equivalent of jump scares in movies. You know, when you read something like that, there's this weird thing that my eyes will do where I will like read it 10 times. It's like the equivalent of a jump scare where I'm like, huh? What? I just can't stop reading it. It's so gross. Like Stephen King, Scott was talking about Stephen King. I still won't forgive him for Baseball Boy in Dr. Sleep. Like that was other level. Like
Well,
that was
especially because that came like, which is essentially a relatively tame book. It came out of nowhere and it was so brutal.
Exactly.
Well, I felt the same way, and this may be like kind of a weird pull, but I felt the same way about Nope. When I got out of seeing Nope, everybody was talking about the chimp scene. When I was just like, but what about the digestion scene? And they were like, what do you mean? And that scene fucked me up. It still fucks me up now. Like when I go have a quiet moment, like when I'm walking my dog or something, that will come back in because it's the psychological part and the implied gore where it's well lit. You can see what's happening. And these people are being like digested and undulated up into this thing. And you can hear these distant muffled screams and this crunching. And there's the part where the woman suddenly realizes what's about to happen to her and what is happening to her. And she just screams and it cuts. And it's just this weird, it's just, and I think that's one thing that psychological horror and gory horror do really well, which is the absurd. And I think the absurd is what can be sometimes the most scary thing when there is no reason and we don't understand a thing. I remember I used to work in movie marketing and we were doing the movie Sinister. And I don't even think it had that name yet. And we went to a screening room to watch it. And it was just me and my friend. And it was a late screening at like 10. And we were alone in this giant screening room. And there's the scene where like the camera's panning over the pool. And you see the thing, Bagul or whatever, standing at the bottom of the pool. And it just looks up at the camera. And I was like, nope, not gory. It's just, it makes no sense. Something to be standing at the bottom of the pool, not needing to breathe. And then you see kind of its face. Just terrified me. And then the lawnmower scene, which again is, thank you, Anna, again, alley-oop. The lawnmower, again, it's gory, but it you don't actually see the thing, but you know what happened.
Yes.
Don't undersell that first scene with the hanging either. That was messed up.
Yeah, and it just sits there. Well, that's another thing too that like I get so jealous of screenwriters because they can just write like and hold. And it's like, no, we have to keep writing. We can't just go like, we're going to let you sit with that for a second and just have
that's the cliffhanger at the end of the chapter.
Yes, Delilah. Yes, you nailed it. That is so true. Because that's the scene I think of a lot too. There's this one in Adam Neville's The Reddening where he finally is inside this ritualistic ceremony and there's this grate that someone keeps looking at, like what's with the grate, and your brain is doing the same thing as the MC, like what is with this grate? Well, then you find out, and then he leaves you on a cliffhanger, so it's just like in this ritualistic sacrifice there's so much outpouring of blood that there needs to be a fucking drain, Yeah.
Hey, but with Nope, though, the biggest jump scare in Nope was those fucking kids in the barn. when they like peek out, right? From the side, I was like, what the fuck is that?
Yes. Don't you love being in a horror movie in an audience of like a full audience and you get everybody's like, that is my extra special. Like we saw Hereditary on opening night. It was opening weekend. It was my birthday. It was a full audience. There were people like uncomfortably laughing. I like made best friends with the woman next to me because her and I would look away at the same time and be like, like, it was, I could have crawled under my seat. It was so visceral.
I am so jealous. I saw Hereditary like opening and the audience I was with hated it.
Oh
no!
What?
I was so sad. I was sitting there watching. I was like, "Don't you know how good this is?"
Yes, I mean there are people who hate things, and that's fine. But that movie scared the shit out of me. did I skip you, Ness? Did you tell us your favorite scene?
I haven't yet.
Oh, tell.
It's actually not from a horror book proper, but from R.F. Kuang's The Poppy War, which is more grimdark fantasy.
Yes.
In the first book of that trilogy, the protagonist enters a city which has been completely brutalized by the Federation that the main character and her allies are fighting against. And the gore has already happened. You just walk into the aftermath, and Kuang does such a great job describing everything, every imaginative, deplorable thing that has happened to the citizens of this city. And I think what really got me was not only the level of horrificness of the acts, but also the fact that that specific scene is directly inspired by real historical events. And kind of knowing that, and knowing that actual true people in history in the last 100 years, like, you know, this is something that actually took place, kind of made it all the more impactful. It was very, 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 very disturbing going through that scene, because up until then it had been a lot of fantastical violence. And then we get to just simple human perpetrated horrors. So I felt that that was a really great scene, especially the placement of it in the novel.
Oh, that's really unique. Yeah. Because sometimes when we're thinking about horror, and I've really been broadening my definition of horror as well. I've always just been sort of like narrow-mindedly pursuing certain genre, subgenres in horror. But I mean, to expand it out into, the grimdark, and there's like, so many of the gothics. Like I was like, where's all my witch books? Like for so long, I feel like I'm such an idiot. I'd be like, where's all my witch books? Oh, it's the gothics. Like they're full of witchcraft. So I've been like compiling those, and there's certain fantasy novels are extremely gory, extremely gory. So it's like, if that's kind of the bloodlust that you're after, like I'm sure we should start making lists of other genres that capitalize on both psychological and gory and together. So yeah. I was kind of looking over my questions, and we've covered like so many. So I do want to remind people watching us, please open it up to some questions for our panel. I mean, now that we've been warming up and talking, and you've heard some of like, the whips that they're working on, like ask some questions about, writing some of these books that you've read of theirs. I do have some rapid fire questions for us, just to kind of get the ball moving while we wait for questions. So this will just be like, you just shout it out. And I'm curious to see, I'm going to be watching you to see which way you answer, but axe or poison?
For
Poison.
for
Poison.
defending ourselves, or for attacking somebody else?
Attacking someone. Axe or poison?
Yeah, axe, yeah.
Axe.
Yeah.
Really? Like, okay, so this is obviously my gory bunch here.
Poison coated axe.
Ooh.
Oh.
Ooh, I like it. Cornfield or haunted estate?
Estate.
Haunted estate.
Haunted estate.
I'm all cornfield. I think outside.
They're so scary.
I think outside is an underrated venue for horror, especially during the daytime. I mean, ever since I saw Midsummer, I was like, I'm gonna do that.
Yeah,
And we really topped it.
Cornfields, you cannot see directionally which way you should even go. You could be running right into the person pursuing you.
Yep.
I don't
and
think
there's
anything's
this
going
big
to top Children of the Corn there, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. It's scary, though. Okay. How about power is out or the road is closed?
Power's out.
Powers out.
Powers out.
Yeah.
Power's
It's
out.
It's like, I mean, are y'all watching Night Country? Like, I'm terrified of darkness now.
Oh, it's so good. It's so
It's
good.
so
Tell
good.
us more.
Okay, Night Country, it's the 4th season of True Detective, and it takes place in a town in Alaska when it's entered into it is pitch dark 24 hours a day now. Like, they won't see sun for like 3 months. And so it's a gory detective, slightly supernatural story, but like there's no light.
Oh God. Yeah. I have a family member who lives in Barrow, which is like the most, northernest point you can get in Alaska. And he actually texted us and was like, well, this is the last day we're going to see the sun. I mean, they basically live in a mud hole or frozen tundra. Like you get one or the other, like dark frozen tundra or sunny mud hole. but he loves it. So, okay. Basement or attic?
Basement.
Basement.
Like, which one's scarier, or which one do we want to be in?
I love the way you psychoanalyze these questions, Chris. How about you're being chased? Do you want to wind up in the basement?
Oh,
or
no. Fucking no. Fuck no. Attic.
Okay,
Attic.
and which one do you want to explore because somebody is in your house, the basement or the attic?
Attic.
Attic.
Attic. I'm not going into the basement under any circumstances.
Yeah.
I said,
Okay,
bring it
how
on. Let's go to the basement.
How about you're writing a horror movie? Do you want to set it in the basement or the attic? The scene.
Basement.
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 It's way scarier.
Guys,
Yeah.
come on, we've seen Night of the Living Dead. Basement is safety.
Well, at the same time, though, I remember reading Girl with the Dragon Tattoo for the first time.
Ooh.
And Blumkus, like, it's like he went downstairs and walked into hell, and you're down in Martin Vanger's basement, and it's like, what can happen down there? And no one's going to know.
I mean,
Like, an attic, typically has, a way out. Like, you can, fall and drop. But when you're subterranean and you can't get up, there's no way out.
and basements can go on forever. I mean, we have Barbarian, right?
Yes. I was just thinking, I was like,
Oh, Barbarian.
who opens that door and goes, I think
Right.
I'm going to check this out.
But that also has the best jump laugh I think I've ever seen in a movie, where he's actually measuring it out for the square footage. like the torture room. Right?
Yeah.
I just can't. Like, after some of these movies and books that I've read recently, it's like Airbnbs are over.
Yeah.
I just, no.
It was a great Airbnb horror movie until it became whatever it became after that, right?
Yeah.
Actually, when I was a little kid, I used to watch Are You Afraid of the Dark? There was like this episode with like this basement with something that only comes out when you play the specific music.
Mhm.
Freaked me the hell out as a kid.
I remember like watching in like Buffalo Bill's basement, which is terrifying anyway because the dude needs to clean up. But like, like what is in the bathtub? I mean, I know, but what the hell's in that bathtub?
Ew.
It just pans by and you go, no.
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 I kind of want to do a story now.
Someone made some real bad soup.
Ew.
I kind of want to do a story now where like some guy like breaks into a basement for some purpose and there's already something in there.
Oh, yes. An old bathtub. Yes.
There's some
Yes.
great basement scenes in Candy Cane Kills by Brian McCauley.
Yes.
I love that book.
I
I
love
love
that
Brian.
too. We put that in our Nightworms package because I knew that was going to be a hit. It's like, who doesn't want to read something like that?
Look at that right there.
Right there.
Yes.
Brian is one of the nicest guys in horror. He's
Totally.
fantastic.
Seriously.
Yeah, he's awesome.
Yes. We love you, Brian. Okay. Trapped with strangers or trapped with family?
Strangers all the way.
Stranger.
I kind of pick strangers too because I think like I don't want to see bad things happen to my family members.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Strangers would be easier.
And yeah, strangers, it's easier to like whittle it down to one person you don't want to keep there.
Yeah.
Family might be a little well, I mean, we depend on your family. You might be like, that weird cousin Jeff, we'll get rid of him. That's fine. Send him out the door to take a look.
Yeah, like if I'm going to be put into a horror movie with my family, like I'm probably the fastest out of the other people in my generation and the older. Like I think I'd probably live.
Yeah.
I think I love my family,
Survival.
not the ones that live in my house, but like the older people.
Who can I
Income.
afford to not see again at Thanksgiving?
I thought Bird Box did the stranger thing really well.
Yeah.
All in that house.
Yeah.
I think the Mist did it well too. Like
Yes.
everybody in that grocery store.
Ooh.
I love those books where you follow different camps of strangers through like an apocalyptic situation where people are just kind of banding together. I think that that's really fun. We do have a question. Lots of psychological horror in SF. Does the panel have examples of gory SF horror books?
The entire Expanse series.
Yes.
I mean,
I would-
the vomit zombies.
Ew.
They literally call them vomit zombies in the books. It's pretty awesome.
I would I would say two of them. Stephen King's The Running Man is one I would definitely say is a good example of that. And also George R. R. Martin's Night Flyers. It is surprisingly like a really, really intense and kind of violent like sci-fi ride.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would also recommend what was it called? The name is escaping me. Is it Ghost Ship by S.A. Barnes?
Oh, yeah.
I know the one you mean.
Do I have that right?
Ghost Station is coming out, but the previous one was Dead Silence.
Dead
Silence.
Silence.
That's
I
what it
was
is.
mixing the two.
That was great.
Yeah, that was great. It was sort of like it was like Event Horizon actually, but like paranormal. Yeah, it was really good. That's my recommendation.
I'm trying to think of gore. Again, I just go back to psychological, but I'm thinking of Stephen King. I'm thinking of The Jaunt. Like that, one of those endings where, again, stuck with me for the rest of my life, where you're just like, no.
I will never forget that.
Yeah.
Honestly, one I would recommend reading, I think Valancourt just put out a new edition, Polyphemus by Michael Shea. He has one horror story everyone's probably seen now on, Cabinet of Curiosities, The Autopsy, which is a fantastic. It's a good episode. Honestly, the story is just as great. It's violent. It's psychologically so intense. I recommend everyone check that out, and also just check out Valancourt because they put out just such amazing stuff in general.
Me
Yes,
too.
props to Valancourt. Yes, Ness, and also Ness's book, The Scourge. Why do I always stumble over that one too? The Scourge Between Stars. It's not hard. And do you have any other SF recommendations for us?
I do. So I'm glad you pointed out Dead Silence by S.A. Barnes, which I really liked, especially for the under the bed scene. I also like Semiosis by Sue Burke, because when you first start the book and then the first instance of violence happened, you're taken completely aback and you realize this is a totally different exoplanetary colonization story than you thought you were reading. David Wellington just recently put out Paradise 1. There's there's gore in that, but I also think that it's definitely worth a read because it has one of the most unique antagonists that I've seen come out in a sci-fi horror recently. And I'll stop there. But
thank you for those.
Can you call Jeff Vandermeer sci-fi? I mean, Annihilation to me has some extremely imaginative, beautiful gore in it. So anyway, I just threw that one out.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think is definitely sci-fi, and also eco horror, which translates to science.
And also the Three Body Problem, by Liu Cixin. That one is really there are sections where they're visiting this other planet. Kind of, you're seeing these visions of this other planet that has these long periods of drought because the star comes close to this planet and cooks it, and the people shrivel up and dehydrate, and then when it passes they kind of rehydrate, and the way it's described is extremely gory and gross to me, even though there's no blood. It's something I'd never read before, and so it's, if you want something new, that's definitely something, and the book as a whole is fantastic.
I mean, oftentimes too, when we think of sci-fi, people always think of space operas or space, but sci-fi is also science. There's so much science in horror. Jeff Vanderstelt, Vandermeer is a good one. But also the Chuck Wendig books, the
Wanderers
and
with
Wayward.
The white
that's science. There's so much science going on in there, and then science can be really gross. In The Troop, they're doing experiments on things.
You know what got me was The Hot Zone. When I read that when I was a teenager, it's the book about Ebola.
Yeah, right.
It describes nonfiction, but describing watching someone die of Ebola on a plane, and you're just
yeah.
I mean,
for sure.
Stephen King's done that really well too. The Stand has this. I mean, The Stand obviously has fantasy elements too, but there's the science fiction element of the virus. There's the long walk. I would say is one of his best, science fiction horror ones.
Tommyknocker scared me, but I can't remember if it was
Aliens.
Yeah, it was. I just remember whenever I saw a green light as a child, I was like, "Well, about to die."
I love that. I love how like movies just live in your head and then they become like your narrative for the rest of your life.
I never saw the movie. That was just reading the book.
Oh, really? Because of the door and the
Well, just in the
cover
book,
of
it's
the-
always light green lights.
Yeah.
And then when you read Matthew McConaughey's biography, every time it says green light, I'm like, ah.
That's awesome.
I also loved World War Z.
Yeah, that's very scientific.
That's a good example.
I thought it was very intelligent, and then I think that's the first zombie apocalypse novel I read that discussed what happens to the people on the International Space Station if something like that were to occur. I had a great time with that.
Yeah, me too.
That reminded me of Matheson's I Am Legend too, because it is, it's a horror novel, but it's certainly a science fiction novel as well.
Yes. Yeah, so can you, like, when I read I Am Legend, would you classify them as like zombies or vampires? Like, weren't they kind of a mix of both?
I always thought they were kind of both.
They're like
Yeah.
mindless vampires.
They were like reanimated vampires.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
'Cause I did call it like a vampire novel, and people were like, "Those are zombies," and I'm like, "Well, I think they're both."
Yeah.
I am what?
Don't you love those bookish arguments and discussions?
I'm just going to give a shout out to Life Force from the 80s, which if you've ever seen, like, Life Force is one of the scariest sci-fi movies I've ever seen, even with some of its low budget effects.
I feel the same way about Cube.
Ew.
Cube.
Yeah.
Event
Now I'm
Horizon.
thinking about that scene.
Yeah, that movie messed
Yeah. I mean, like, all of these people, these strangers are like locked inside of some place that they have to like work their way out of. And it's terrifying. Like, I always think of the dental flossy scene. So.
Yeah. I remember seeing that like on like daytime TV on like USA, like after like Problem Child 2. I was like, these do not go together.
Event Horizon.
Instead of silk stockings and Pacific Blue, and everything was cool again.
Does anyone have? Oh, here's a question. Oh, Hamlin. Hi, Hamlin. A TV show, but Jesse Plemons' episode of Black Mirror where he clones his coworkers in a computer program is terrifying. Oh, not a question, but definitely a great comment. Black Mirror is fantastic for sci-fi and, technology gone awry, like little mini horror movies for sure. And then Whitney says, The Stand, The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon, The Long Walk. Yes. I love it. Well, let's close our panel with a few more of these flash questions, okay? So we did Trapped with Strangers or Family. Thinking about your projects and what you've been working on and what you love to work on, how about novel or novella?
Novel.
Both.
Both. Yeah.
Both.
Yeah, I mean, I love to read a good novel, but I also love the format of a novella because I feel like horror is, you can keep the tension tight through a novella. Yeah. Paranormal or supernatural?
Supernatural.
Paranormal.
Yeah. I've been reading a lot of Gothic. I like paranormal right now.
See, I like, it's interesting. I like, my upcoming book is a Gothic and there are paranormal aspects, but I like the idea of, is there something else that what we're experiencing in this book as paranormal is connected to? Is there something bigger? And I just love that kind of sense of wonder when you read a book like that, and it just sort of hints at, oh, there's these other, something else is going on behind the page that I can't see. And it feels like there's a logic to it, right? It's not like it's just the author's just throwing things out there to go, oh, and maybe there's this. But I like that if I'm reading a paranormal story, I like it when they give little nods that maybe there's a bigger picture, that suggests maybe a supernatural beyond just what we see. So why not both?
Yeah, definitely. I think we're making a good case for for both being in that the psychological serves the gore, really. Yeah. Also, I did want to make a point too with the Gothics. If people, discount them as being part of the horror genre, I mean, I remember watching Rebecca. Well, first I read it when I was in 8th grade, and then I saw the movie. But I remember for the first time realizing that you could be gaslit. Like, that was when I learned about gaslighting. And then I was telling my mom about it, and we watched Gaslight with Ingrid Bergman. And I remember being like, your husband could do this to you. And like, just thinking like the way that someone could break down a mind and make people feel like they're crazy, like that's true horror, And then as a woman, the Gothics are full of women being relegated to hysteria and being discounted and trapped in an attic, like, so it's true horror right there.
And yet
psychological.
We're still not listening. Like, they've been telling these stories for hundreds of years.
Right.
Openly. What it was literally called gaslight. Like, it's right there.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Also, growing up two doors down, there's literally a woman named Mrs. Danvers.
I've got a novel out next year called It'll Only Hurt for a Moment. That is
Great title.
Thank you. I always forget it. Minute and moment are way too close. But it's set in a writer's retreat that's on the grounds of an abandoned asylum that everybody said was like the finest resort for the fanciest, most rich people, and it was not. But like, I read this book.
Ooh. Yes.
Oh my God, what they did to these women.
Oh my God.
And the ones who were, it was just like, she was perfectly sane in every single way, but her husband was like, she's crazy. And they were like, cool, I'll take your word for it.
Yeah.
And they would put perfectly sane people in there until they went insane. And it's nonfiction that reads like horror.
That's actually the conceit of the redemption of Morgan Bright is I've resurrected the law that allows husbands to have their wives committed freely, because I'm just sort of like, well, if we just kind of look at the direction things are going, that was true in the past, and just because it's not true now doesn't mean it can't be true again. And who's the author of that book?
This one?
Yeah, because I read a bunch and I did not read that one.
Kate Moore.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, well, I do want to thank all of you for spending time with me talking about horror movies and horror books. Like, it's literally my favorite thing to do is to just chat about these things. And thank you for all of the people who are watching. Thank you to our hosts at TBRCon for hanging out and putting this together and donating their time to put all of these panels together. All of these authors have amazing work out currently, and then also have things coming up. So you can follow them on social media, anywhere that they are. Do you guys have any specific place where you put out the most updates? Like, I know certain social media, everything kind of is a mix up right now. So where can people find you? Chris, where are you?
Oh my God, I'm
mainly.
I'm mainly on Blue Sky and Twitter.
Okay, Zach, where are you mainly?
Blue Sky and Twitter.
Scott.
Instagram, but it's mostly just ads that I make. I don't really make anything else.
Okay, Ness, where are you?
Probably Instagram, and then everything is up on my website.
Perfect. Delilah, where are you?
I'm up on Blue Sky and Instagram at Delilah S. Dawson. I have abandoned my Twitter feed because...
Yes, same. I've abandoned Twitter. I am primarily on Instagram, and all I do every single day is recommend books by these amazing people. So if you want to follow me, I will hook you up and break your bank, and you will never be able to bring a wallet into a bookstore ever again. And you will sign up for Nightworms and get books delivered to your door, and you will never read them all until you die. So
I have to give a shout to Nightworms because they sent me some books, and it included was cotton candy flavored coffee. So it might don't hate. It might sound like something that you'd never want to put in your mouth, but it wasn't bad. It wasn't bad.
That's right. We give you everything you need for the perfect situation to sit down and read a book and have a great excuse. You get a hot
That's so
beverage,
cool.
a bookmark, a sticker and a magnet, and 2 books. You're set. You're golden for a month.
It's a genius idea.
Thank you for moderating.
Yes, thank you
Oh,
so
yeah.
much.
Thank you so much, Sadie.
And for
Yeah.
supporting us on your Instagram and all the places where you tell people
Yes,
about our book.
and all you do in writing like great books to tell people to pick up great books.
Yeah, no, it is my greatest pleasure. Like, thank you all. This is books is my mental health like savior. So I've been doing it since I was able to read chapter books. So I just thank storytellers. I thank you guys for sitting down and hammering it out. Like, I love everything that you do. I hope you guys get paid well to do it and never ever stop.
Thank you.
Thank
Yay.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.